What happens when we die? Presentation by Christine Miskelly, Johnny Stork and Paula Staunton. The majority of us prefer not to think about our inevitable death, and many consider it frightening to do so. However, our death is the one thing we can all be sure of. Most religious traditions have their teachings about death, and few consider the death of the body as being the final end of the consciousness which had been inhabited by the corporeal being. Whether it is an eternity in heaven, resurrection, or some form of reincarnation, most religions teach that life or conscious awareness continues in some form. The big question is, does consciousness continue? The materialist view teaches us that there is no reality beyond the physical. The physical brain produces conscious experience, and hence death of the brain must mean the end of conscious awareness. In contrast to the materialist view of death, researchers like Peter Fenwick and others who've looked into the experiences of the dying have found that many people have what are called end-of-life experiences, or ELEs. These are a collection of phenomena. One of these is the carer's perception of the dying person conversing with deceased relatives and metaphysical beings. These entities appear to put the person at ease with the inevitable passage. Other ELEs appear to affect the behaviours of pets, stop clocks, and other mechanical anomalies, as well as reports of visual effects of something leaving the body of the deceased during the death process. Despite the above experiences being fairly common in 21st century Western society, death has become a medical occurrence, a failure of attempts by the medical profession to prolong life. According to a recent report by Demos, out of 500,000 people who die each year in the UK, only 18% die at home. Yet 60% of people surveyed said home is where they would like to die. For many, death is experienced in a harsh hospital environment where well-meaning hospital staff have little time and little understanding of the spiritual needs of the dying. What we'd like to share with you in this presentation is a different view of death. A view which sees death as a potentially beautiful and transformative experience, especially when there are caregivers who are trained to recognise and support the unique psychological, emotional and spiritual needs of the dying. The lecture we chose as our starting point was one given by Peter Fenwick at the Beyond the Brain conference in August 2009. The lecture was entitled Death, A Journey to Elsewhere. Who is the Traveller? In it he talks about end-of-life experiences and explains why it is important for those to be recognised and understood as an important part of the dying process, where the individual is enabled to come to terms with their past life and to transition to a new state of being. In a 5-year retrospective study together with Sue Brain and Hilary Lovelace, Peter Fenwick has carried out extensive research into end-of-life experiences, beginning with a pilot study using a palliative care team in London. He asked about their observations of these ELEs in dying patients. He was interested in how often these events were observed and whether they were associated with medication or seemed to be an intrinsic part of the dying process. Caretakers and family members of patients in 3 palliative care facilities in the UK were interviewed about their experiences with the dying and asked to describe some of the events, conversations, visions and other experiences they witnessed. or were reported to them by those in care. Initial questionnaires to 3 doctors and 6 other carers were followed up with 1-hour interviews. The research was then extended to hospices and nursing homes. Initial studies were 5-year retrospectives looking back on the carers' memories of events. However, after the first round, they were able to return after a year and carry out a prospective study, as the carers were now much more aware of ELEs and felt more able to discuss them. The findings that these occurrences were common and were viewed by staff as being integral to the process of dying. 90% of carers knew of these experiences, and in the prospective study, 55% of carers had deathbed visions related to them. Fenwick goes on to point out that these are deeply spiritual experiences which can help individuals come to terms with past life events as well as their own imminent death. They may experience a desire for reconciliation with someone or to put their affairs in order. He says that the dying enter a kind of death matrix where they seem to straddle this reality and an alternative one. The assumption that death is just a final switching off of biological systems. Instead, we are invited to consider that death may be a gradual shifting from our normal reality into a yet ill-understood state. The anecdotes quoted by Fenwick describe how the dying can experience a beautiful transition into another reality. They can sometimes sense the very real presences of loved ones who have died before them, and may in turn contact others to let them know of their own passing. So, what exactly are end-of-life experiences? Fenwick describes a number of experiences reported by the caregivers. Deathbed visions. Here, the dying person may be visited by a deceased loved one who seems to be coming to collect them. Sometimes this visitation may be a day or 2 before death. These visits are nearly always accompanied by feelings of love. The dying person is frequently observed to smile and appear to be seeing the visitor in real space. Sometimes they may appear to be holding a rational conversation with the dead relative whilst at the same time talking with a living nurse. This seems to challenge the idea that visions are related to some decline in brain function. Deathbed coincidences. There are many accounts of friends of family members who experience dreams, pains, or other physical sensations at the time when a loved one died. Premonitory visitors and visions. Sometimes an individual may receive a vision of someone they know saying that their time is approaching. Reconciliatory visions and visitors. Sometimes relatives may see a vision of the dying person or experience a visit as if the departing person wishes to make amends or to reconcile in some way. Other phenomena at the time of death. These include clocks stopping, mechanical malfunctions, and strange animal behaviour. One of our group recently lost a close relative. At the time of death, his wife received a blank text message from him. Problems with this type of research. Until recently, there was very little research on the process of dying, and work in the field is difficult for a number of obvious reasons. Clearly, there are significant ethical implications interviewing people at the point of death, because they would seem intrusive, and members of the families of the bereaved may not wish to talk to a researcher. This is why Fenwick chose to conduct his research with carers rather than relatives. On the other hand, the reverse could also be true, and people may be glad to have someone with whom they can share these intimate experiences. The data collected in the retrospective component of the study comes from the second-hand reports of caregivers of the dying and not from the patients themselves. These reports could be subject to the misinformation effect, where episodic memories can be influenced by post-event information. The individual may falsely recall events which did not happen. Since there is no way to compare these second-hand stories with the actual descriptions of the end-of-life events as experienced or expressed by the patients themselves, we have no idea as to their accuracy. The sample use was limited to a range of hospitals and hospices in the UK, and one might wonder if these experiences are universal. Can we generalise the findings? Does the nature of the experience vary across cultures? Although Fenwick in 2009 reports there is likely to be a strong cultural influence with regards to the content of these end-of-life experiences, 10% of the UK caregivers reported religious figures or themes in the stories relayed to them by patients, while a study in India reported more than 50%. Maybe the generalizability of ELL content is less important than the frequency of the ELEs themselves. There can also be challenges in getting this kind of research published. As some of the accounts challenge mainstream views, they can be seen as being of lesser importance than the relief of physical pain or the prolonging of life. Some journals may not want to be associated with the research, which may begin to challenge existing paradigms. Near-death experiences. NDEs may provide evidence of the spiritual and profound nature of dying and the continuation of consciousness. Although a debated and disputed phenomena, the widespread reporting of this occurrence could provide insight to what happens when we die and who the traveller may be. There is an increasing body of research looking at experience of those who have died and returned to life. Until recently, this was almost unheard of, but improvements in medicine and cardiology means more people can be resuscitated who have technically died. In cardiac arrest, the heart stops. This rapidly leads to cessation of breathing and flatlining of the EEG readout from the brain. When this occurs, the person is considered to be dead. No measurable brain activity means there should be no conscious experience. However, increasing numbers of people who have been resuscitated are reporting experience of heightened consciousness and recall for details of what was going on around them whilst they were in this state. The generic term for these experiences is near-death experiences. One of the features of these experiences is that they are profoundly meaningful and life-changing for the individuals concerned. In his book, Life After Life, Raymond Moody, MD, describes 9 elements of near-death experiences. 1. A strange sound, a buzzing or ringing noise while having a sense of being dead. 2. Peace and painlessness. While people are dying, they may be in intense pain, but as soon as they leave the body, the pain vanishes and they experience peace. Out-of-body experience. The dying often have a sensation of rising up and floating above their own body while it is surrounded by a medical team and watching it down below while feeling comfortable. They experience the feeling of being in a spiritual body that appears to be a sort of living energy field. The tunnel experience. An experience of being drawn into darkness through a tunnel at an extremely high speed until reaching a realm of radiant gold and white light. Rising rapidly into the heavens. Instead of a tunnel, some people report rising suddenly into the heavens and seeing the earth and the celestial sphere as if they could be seen by astronauts in space. People of light. Once on the other side of the tunnel, or after they have risen into the heavens, the dying meet people who glow with an inner light. Often they find that friends and relatives who have already died are there to greet them. The being of light. After meeting the people of light, the dying often meet a powerful spiritual being, whom some have identified as God, Jesus, or some other religious figure. The life review. The being of light presents the dying with a panoramic review of everything they've ever done. That is, they relive every act they have ever done to other people and come away feeling that love is the most important thing in life. Reluctance to return. The being of light sometimes tells the dying that they must return to life. Other times they are given a choice of staying or returning. In other cases they are reluctant to return. The people who choose to return do so only because of loved ones or other things they feel they need to do. How do NDEs add to our understanding of consciousness? This would require a detailed discussion to fully answer this question, and is a presentation in itself. NDE researcher and cardiologist Van Lommel considers consciousness to be non-local and endless. He argues that the essence of our consciousness predates our birth and our body will survive death. There will be many reasons to accept that our consciousness is not generated by the brain, but rather being received by it. He describes the brain as being like a computer interfacing with the internet. He says the brain is a reducing valve or filter for consciousness. He postulates that DNA and quantum physics would make such non-local access possible. Bruce Lipton, in Biology of Belief, has a similar view, arguing instead that the cell is the receiver of consciousness. Of course, this kind of explanation is unacceptable to many scientists who argue that NDEs are a feature of the dying brain. Researchers at the University of Michigan have argued that NDEs are a result of increased neuronal activity that occurs when the heart stops beating. They investigated the electrical signals in the brains of 9 anaesthetised rats after induced cardiac arrest and saw activity patterns that they said were associated with a hyper-alerted state. They argue that the sequence of neuronal firing in the visual cortex seemed to resemble that commonly reported in visual hallucinations like tunnels. Higher order parts of the brain might create emotions or ideas in a similar random fashion, populating the experience. However, generalising from animal research to humans is notoriously difficult, and there are many criticisms which can be made of this research. In terms of this presentation, however, we would like to comment on the transformational effects of these NDEs. These experiences are so profound and meaningful that they can be life-changing. There can be huge shifts in attitudes, values and beliefs, and a sense now not of believing in the continuation of life after death, but in knowing this to be true by direct experience. In Hole in One, the near-death experience and the ethic of interconnectedness, David Lorimer outlines 9 shifts in attitudes and values which are consistently found to follow NDE. These are an overcoming of the fear of death and conviction of the continuation of consciousness beyond physical death, an enhanced appreciation of life and a desire to live fully in the present, an emphasis on unconditional love, tolerance and acceptance of others, increased compassion, an expanded sensitivity and a feeling of thinner boundaries between the experience and other people or nature, a decreased adherence to conventional material values or personal ambition, fame, wealth and status, a spiritual orientation whose most important feature is an inward feeling or closeness to the divine, a sense of meaning and purpose to life, and often a sense of some mission to fulfill, the wish to understand the meaning of life and death. Lorimer quotes the following testimony as an example of the transformative effects of near-death experience. Over the years, I've undergone a number of changes. I feel a strong connection with nature. The garden now plays an important role in my life. I've become more emotional. I've acquired a great sense of justice. I've become more patient and peaceful. I can see things in perspective now. My aggression is a thing of the past. I feel a strong inner urge to never lie again. Before, I never knew anything about spirituality. I wasn't interested. But now I've become aware of prophetic powers with which I can help others. I have a sixth sense. End of quote. Dr. Eben Alexander was a scientist who disputed spiritual explanations of NDE. A respected neurosurgeon, Dr. Alexander's own brain was attacked by a rare form of meningitis. For 7 days he lay in a coma, When he finally came out, it was perceived as miraculous by the medical profession, considering the state of his brain. There is no medical explanation to describe Evan's recovery. Alexander journeyed into the depths of non-ordinary realities and came back with an enhanced love of life and understanding of consciousness. He now has a deep personal understanding that death is not the end of existence, but only a dynamic transition into a never-ending reality. However, for some people, there may be great difficulty in integrating these experiences, particularly if they are faced with negative reactions from family and friends. Some might find that retreating into years of silence can be one way of coping. Van Lommel's research indicates that the integration process can last at least 7 years or more. Some people were only able to talk about their experience 50 years after the event. It had been a lifelong secret. These people have found it almost impossible to live their lives according to their newfound insights. This may also have implications for research findings in this area. Researchers will usually use advertising or the internet to find individuals who have experienced NDEs. There could be a bias in that those who respond might be more likely to be those who have come to terms with and integrated this experience. We might be less likely to hear about people who had an unpleasant NDE or who had difficulties in returning to normal life. How might this research improve the experiences of the dying? One of the outcomes of Fenwick's research had been the publication of 2 guides which are available online: End of Life Experiences, a guide for carers of the dying, and Nearing the End of Life, a guide for relatives and friends of the dying. It is hoped that as awareness increases of the normality of these experiences and the need to see them as important and meaningful, that the process of dying may be supported more effectively by families and carers. We hope we have shown that there is much more to be learned about the process of dying, and that exploring the richness of people's experiences of death can contribute to a deeper understanding of consciousness. However, some questions remain unanswered. Why don't all people have these experiences? Some people who come back from cardiac arrest do not recall any unusual experiences. Why might that be? Even though these experiences are profound and meaningful, and people recall a being of light or a tunnel, in what sense can these things be said to exist, and is it really evidence for continuation of consciousness? Whatever the answers to these questions, it is clear that there is a case for improved provision for the dying. Hospitals particularly need to recognise that, whatever an individual's religious beliefs, the process of death has the potential to be a profound and important experience which can be enriched by sensitive care and a deep understanding of what it means to die. Thank you.